Pierre Poilievre thinks he's a great prime minister in waiting, but he's a terrible leader of the opposition, because what he doesn't do is, I think he's not an effective opposition leader.
But how effective of an opposition can you be when you have another opposition party that's pretending to be the government? Today, we have the pleasure of chatting with Mark Keeley, Chief Advocate and President of K&A Incorporated, one of Canada's premier public policy and project management organizations, specializing in healthcare, energy, and natural resources. Mark was also an advisor and staffer for Prime Minister John Turner and has been a member of the Liberal Party his entire life.
Let's take a look. Mark, welcome to Northern Perspective.
Thanks, Ryan.
So, one of the things that we want to do on Northern Perspective is get different opinions. We don't like being an echo chamber. We don't like hearing just from conservatives as much as we like hearing from conservatives. But it is also very valuable, not just for us, but for Canadians to consider all points of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
Especially when we're entering into probably one of the most consequential elections in recent history for Canada. Yes. So why don't you just take us all the way back? How did you get into this crazy thing called politics, and what drew you to the Liberal Party?
So, great question. And look, thanks to you and Tanya for having me here. And when Tanya asked to come on the show, I want to talk about this from a Liberal perspective. I think I could give that to you in blood. So I've been involved. I've been involved in this party since I was 14 years old. And, I'm originally from Niagara Falls. I come from a large family. My mother and her mother were very, very involved in Liberal Party politics. It was my grandmother's sister, who was a very famous judge in Canada, who sort of got me involved in politics when I was 14. And I don't know what it was, but I loved knocking on doors. I just loved that freewheeling style of doing political campaigns. And in the 70s, there were a lot of them. And so I became a full-blown member in 1976. And then I'll remember this as the day is long. Around grade 12, we had set up this Young Liberal Association in Niagara Falls, and it had more members of that organization, of Young Liberals, than any other Young Liberal organization in the entire country. So people said, "Oh, I want to know who this guy is and how he." And I just went to the right high school, hung out with people. So I thought it was great that I got to sort of network with people who were very interested in politics at that age. Could you believe it? And so that sort of got me very interested. I studied it in university, and then my first job out of university was working with John Turner when he was Prime Minister of Canada. So it never really looked back. So since then, I've just been, it's for me, as Brian Mulroney says about his party, I'm a child of the Liberal Party.
Well, and I think that's what you see in every party, whether it's NDP, whether it's green, whatever the color of the party is. And, myself, I wasn't always into politics. I wasn't a lifelong member of any party. I was too focused on getting out of debt and working. And when an election came around, I probably took 10 seconds, like the vast majority of Canadians, to see, all right, who stands for what? Okay, I'll vote for that party, and that's it. Wasn't really interested in municipal elections. Wasn't really taking an interest in provincial elections because I was too busy trying to deal with my own problems. And I think as I've gotten older, I've started to realize that, I hope a lot of Canadians have realized, that when there's an election, that is your problem. That is something that you need to pay attention to, no matter what level of government it is, no matter what party it is that's in power. We have a civic duty to hold these people to account, because if we don't, well, when the cat's away, the mice will play, as they say. So give us just a sense of what was it like to work for a prime minister, the head of this country. even as short as that was.
Well, but look, it wasn't just the fact that he was prime minister. And look, John Turner had a fantastic parliamentary career that dated back to 1962. So when he did get there to the prime minister's office, some people say he wasn't ready, but he was ready. He knew this country from coast to coast to coast, as they like to say. He had paddled every single river in this country. He knew everybody's name across this country. He had a very, very well-honed network of people, not only in politics, but in business. But so when he became prime minister, yeah, we didn't have that long of a tenure, but who cares? The point of the exercise is what John Turner did, and I say this a lot to people, is he rebuilt the Liberal Party that had been really ignored by his predecessor, who just happens to be the father of the former
current guy,
the current prime minister. He had really forgotten the necessity of having a party, and Turner rebuilt it. So I remember when Turner died, I was doing an interview with CBC, and they said, "What do you think Turner's legacy was?" We had traveled the world, he and I, together for the 40 years that we were hanging out. But from 1984 to 1990, he rebuilt the Liberal Party from the ground up. And it was a fascinating time. And the point I'm trying to make on that is that set the table for Jean Chrétien to become prime minister in 1993 for 3 consecutive majority terms. So I really think that the Liberal Party owes a huge debt to John Turner and the hard work that he put in place all those years. So to your question, what's it like? It was a lot of fun. Every day you were doing something that made news. You said at the outset of this, not just elections, Ryan. It's every single day people must understand that we live in an environment that's under threat because democracies are under threat. So I think the more that we put ourselves in the position to say, let's not let this become a threat. Let's not let this go away. Let's do something. And I encourage people, and I'm encouraged by your comments where you say, sure, we have people that are conservatives that support you. And I'm a liberal and I support what you're doing. But at the same time, everybody has a different opinion and they should be celebrated for that and not castigated or feeling like they're going to be canceled or just hammered over the head. So this is why I think this is an important thing that A, you're doing, but B, why I really enjoy politics.
So dovetailing off of that, one of the things that we've noticed in Canada over the last 10 years is, and this has been, I think, a cultural aspect that people will I attribute to the far left, not people that are just on the center left, is that if you have a opposing opinion, the immediate reaction is not to sit down and listen, not to have a conversation. It's to try to prevent you from even talking. And we've seen this at some of the universities. There's some controversial people with some controversial opinions. But unless you're advocating violence, unless you're advocating for people to actually have harm, I think that's one of the prices of having freedom of expression and freedom of speech. You may not like what they have to say. You may think it's abhorrent, but they have to be able to say it. And that's been one of the criticisms, especially in Canada over the last 10 years, is that seems to have been, starting to be eroded. And we've seen legislation that was implemented in this past government, Bill C-11 and arguably C-18, that when they put that puzzle together, that starts to become problematic for creators online that the CRTC doesn't recognize as quote-unquote Canadian content. And even C-63, where there was a threat of potential life imprisonment depending on how that law was going to be implemented and what classifies as a hate crime. So what has been your take on all of that? Do you agree with that take, or do you have a different perspective?
No, my perspective is we live in a country that's right next door to the largest, the single largest collection of conspicuous consumers and patriots that ever existed on planet Earth. And so we can be swallowed up in that if we don't protect what we have. And I believe in CanCon. I believe that we have to protect things like the airwaves or internet or of those kinds of things from being sucked into that vortex. But so having said all that, I also think that we can't put ourselves in the position to let free speech and to the issues that are sort of around free speech foment hate or misinformation that incites violence, those kinds of things. And I'm a staunch proponent of that kind of action or reaction as it relates to the bills that you brought up or the acts that you brought up. So I really think that we have to protect that. And we live in a country that has a fantastic rule of law. And, God bless you. Again, I'm grateful for having spent all those years with John Turner, who was probably one of the best ministers of justice this country had ever seen. And so we protected ourselves that way too. But we're on a slippery slope right now because people are saying, well, I get to say that because I got free speech. Well, honest to God, sometimes what you say has an impact. And we've got to be very mindful of the impact that you have. And I've even been critical sometimes of some of the things that the current government has done over the last 10 years by creating division, fomenting a little bit of hate, those kinds of things that have caused people to react. And that's not good in this country. We've got to get back to some semblance of order and for all intents and purposes, regulation that helps put that in place.
Well, and I don't think I've seen Canada in my short lifetime more divided than it has been over the last, especially 5 years. And all I can recall Justin Trudeau saying and in his cabinet is, oh, well, the Conservatives are dividing Canadians. Well, you've had 3 different Conservative leaders, 3 kind of versions of the Conservative Party, but you can argue there may have never been a more hated prime minister in the history of Canada than Justin Trudeau up to this point, to the point where he was literally kicked out by his own caucus. So it's problematic for Canadians because for people that are center left in their political allegiance, they will identify most likely with the Liberal Party or want to, but the issue is they're now being lumped in with Justin Trudeau and call it the radical policies that he's brought to bear, as well as all the division that he has sown. So, but we're hearing more from, we call them old stock liberals, the good liberals, as some people call them, and they give a completely different perspective on Justin Trudeau than maybe his own party would. So, given that you've been with the Liberal Party so long, you have been with multiple governments, you literally grew up with the first Trudeau, John Turner, Chrétien, Martin. What's your take on Justin Trudeau's reign?
Well, look, you talked about, you used the word radical. That's a perspective, and I appreciate that perspective, and I think some people have said that too. But I think to be fair, we have a prime minister who grew up in this world. He grew up in politics. He grew up living at 24 Sussex Drive the day he was born. Mm-hmm. So when you think about who his father was and learning at the feet of probably the most transformational prime minister this country ever encountered was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And to see, I've known Justin Trudeau since he was 12 years old. So I've seen him mature. I've seen him grow, and I've seen him blossom into a role in the early 2000s to take on a role as a member of parliament. And then when we saw all that nonsense that was happening in the early 2000s about, how the Liberals were trying to put together this coalition with the NDP to take government away. Yeah. It was just a ridiculous proposition. Yeah. And Liberals, and me included, were saying, this is nonsense. And so we needed to get some however you want to call it, some certainty to it. And lo and behold, Trudeau said, I'm going to step up. Look, I think his legacy is going to be okay. And when I say okay, I want to put a bit of a proviso on that. From 2015, when he came in, he used the terms sunny ways. And I think that in a lot of ways we had been You could shoot a cannon in Ottawa during the 10 years of the previous government because nobody was going there. They weren't meeting people. There was this sense that Canada was really closed off. We had been trying to do things with water, with environment that had always been stymied by the previous government in before 2015. So we saw this new sunny ways that was for all intents and purposes, stylized by Justin Trudeau in his youth, his enthusiasm, his energy, all of those kinds of things. We quickly learned, and I say this, we quickly learned that a lot of it was performative. And I think people people say, well, you know, the Liberal Party won 3 elections. No, we won 1 election in 2015. In 2019, we were really spanked, and we were spanked because people saw, you know, this is more talk than it is action. And but I wouldn't say that there weren't good things that happened, because a lot of good things happened. You know, we've now got people thinking about a carbon-free economy. Those are things that are really, really laying at the feet of Justin Trudeau and what he did. We have, Indigenous reconciliation that never was happening. And so I think that in terms of the kinds of things that Justin Trudeau could take credit for, there are a lot of them. But there was also this culture of, you know, everything was focused around the Prime Minister's office. And that's a problem. And when you think about that, people are now saying, you know, you've got Mark Carney now, and everybody that's in the cabinet was in Justin Trudeau's cabinet, so it's the same damn people. I'm saying no, it's not. It's a different style. I'll bet you dollars to donuts that Carney's going to be deferential, with the exception of probably his Minister of Finance, because I think he knows that better than anybody. But he wants to. He's calling it a sort of a wartime cabinet, because these are very, very interesting times. But it's fundamentally different because the Prime Minister's office isn't going to be doing everything.
So what would you say to Canadians that they look at Justin Trudeau's legacy? They will immediately be drawn to their perception of how he handled COVID-19. They will be drawn to the fact that whether people agree with it or not, he borrowed $600 billion ish, doubled our national debt, and doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, that would have had an impact on inflation, 100%. To what degree? That's up to the economists to debate. And they will also talk about the policies on vaccination and the invocation of the Emergencies Act. I think that's a lot where, for any of the good things that Justin Trudeau did do, I think they can't even focus on that because they're so concentrate on their perception of those main items. What would you say to Canadians that would say, well, Justin Trudeau was garbage because of those specific events?
Well, I'd say that's unfair. I really say that's unfair. I think, you know, during the pandemic, I was very much involved in making sure, not only in Canada but in many countries, that we managed what we thought were clinical practice guidelines on the management of a pandemic, that because we're such a transient world right now, that everybody needed to do the same thing. And I think Canada did a superb job. We contained it. We contained COVID. We made sure that people weren't destitute or lost things because they weren't working. We made sure that their health was in check, which is why I think the country wanted to put in place vaccination mandates, and that we moved forward, I think, with good policies that are going to save us in the next pandemic. Listen, Ryan, I guess I would kind of agree with you that if you fight an election like we did in 2021, that said that we need to if you're, you know, you remember that all the rhetoric that was being flown about, you're either a vaxxer or you're an anti-vaxxer, and if you're an anti-vaxxer, you're a bad person. Well, that kind of nonsense really, I think, got people a little bit exercised. But I think based on the numbers and based on how we handled Canada during the pandemic, I think he should be applauded for what he did. And he was out there. He put himself in a position every single day to tell Canadians, I got your back. I know that this is a tough issue for you, but we'll help you. And we did that through things like CERB, all of those kinds of things that put Canadians in a position where they didn't have to worry at a time when there was huge worry out there. So I think he lowered the temperature a lot, and I think we should give him a bit of credit for that.
Do you think he was correct in with his approach to the trucker convoy and calling that Emergencies Act at that point? Or do you think that was a misstep? We know we know the court decision.
Sure. And I did a lot of media on this too, and I just think it was unfair that Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government ostensibly wore a lot of that, but there are a lot of people that should be wearing some of the blame for what had happened, including police. And when you look at, this is a classic example of what happens in Canada. You have RCMP, NCC, OPP, Ottawa Police, and none of them were coordinating in terms of what needed to happen. Trucks were pulling up in front of the House of Commons. That's not Justin Trudeau's fault. So I just think at some point we had to say, you got to move. And they weren't going to move. And so, this was an occupation. And I think that's how they wanted to deal with an occupation, that we had to get those, I don't want to say those people, but that's the way we wanted to get the folks who were occupying, we had to get them some way to leave. And so, putting in I wasn't in favor of, of putting in place an Emergency Measures Act, but we did. And we have to deal with the fallout of that. And I think the Prime Minister answered those questions. But it wasn't one of those things where if you were, because you heard this, people were saying, well, they've got swastikas and they've got, I didn't see that nonsense.
Right.
It was just, there was overblown rhetoric around that. And, people, my son was down there and he said, Dad, they're not bad people. They're good family people with young kids here. And people were literally trying to, understand why were we put in a position where we had to have this imposition. And there was a lot of that. And look, I don't like the fact that some folks had their bank accounts frozen. I don't like that fact. And I don't like, but there were some parts of this where, for example, in Windsor, we stopped the flow of goods and services across that border.
Yeah.
We were hurting ourselves,
blockade,
for God's sakes. This is nonsense. And the same thing in Coutts.
Yep.
So I'm all for the imposition of issues where police had to go in and intervene from that perspective. But, at the end of the day, there were a lot of human rights that were trampled on.
Yeah, and it seems like, these folks went to Ottawa to have their voices heard, and their representatives in Ottawa didn't want to hear it.
Tanya, I'm not certain that if I was advising a politician that I would say, go and see them. Because at the time, that would mean that you'd have to do that with everybody that had an issue, Picayune or not. But I just think, look, we put in place, which was the government's right, nationally and provincially and municipally, to do what they needed to do to manage at a very unsettled time. And I think people didn't like it, and they said, well, you've got to listen to me, you've got to do something, and to be very fair to the government, when they were handed a piece of paper that says, we want the Governor General to dissolve government and put this person in as the head of the government. Well, you got to ignore that.
Well, I mean, there's obviously limitations to what a sitting government can and can't do. Again, I think it would be undemocratic for a certain group of people to say, we don't like this government that was democratically chosen by the entire country, so we want it changed. So that I understand you can't do, but I think there needs to be a conversation. And we generally feel that, we'll get viewers come to us and say, I've tried emailing my MP, I've tried contacting them, they won't talk with me. I think there's this perception perhaps in the country that democracy is not working the way we want it to.
Well, that's a larger question. And I think because we do have to, that conversation needs to take place. Why are people feeling disenfranchised from their government? Why are people feeling like government doesn't listen to them? And there are myriad reasons for that. And I think the bigger question that we have to ask ourselves in this country is we have a very oppressive bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy is really, for all intents and purposes, if a government lets them, they would overtake the business of government. And this is where people say, no, that's not what's happening. That's not what should happen in a democracy. And frankly, we live in a parliamentary democracy, and the word parliament comes from the Norman word parler, to speak. So to your point, we need that to happen. And maybe that's I'm going to say this, and my friends in the Liberal Party might say that's probably a reason why we shouldn't have prorogued. But anyway.
Now you're in trouble, Mark. But, okay. So let's talk a bit about, the mistrust in government, because I think, this hasn't started with the Liberal Party. I think everyone should, can admit that. It seems that all governments have their skeletons. All governments have their ghosts in the closet. The trouble that I think Canadians are having right now is, in this time of the internet, social media, mass access to be able to even watch government, because we haven't been able to do that before.
Yes.
But with shows like ours and others, and having access to Parleview and SendView and all these different mediums, people can literally watch their government work. And when there's all these scandals that come out, whether it's scandals by the agency or by the ministers themselves, Canadians are always asking the same question: why is nobody ever held accountable? And usually the talking point that's used is, well, you see that accountability in the next election. That doesn't wash for Canadians. When you have people potentially breaking laws, they should be investigated. When you have people that are committing corruption that isn't illegal, that really frustrates Canadians.
Yes.
Do you think that we need, on the government as a whole, to have a completely different look at how politicians themselves are held accountable with ethics laws, tying it to our justice system? That way, Canadians at least have the perception that they are servant and not master.
We have an already great check and balance in this country. We have we call that role the Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition. And their job is to be an effective opposition to the government, a good check and balance. It's their job to do that. It's their job to make sure that, if I want to hold you to account, I can hold you to account and be effective doing that. And if they're not doing that, that doesn't serve the country well. So I keep thinking, sure, Pierre Poilievre thinks he's a great prime minister in waiting, but he's a terrible leader of the opposition, because what he doesn't do is, I think he's not an effective opposition leader.
But how effective of an opposition can you be when you have another opposition party that's pretending to be the government?
I agree with that. No, that's something that we have to deal with too. But again, we live in a parliamentary democracy, and you win a government by the number of seats that you have. Mm-hmm. And if you could have an agreement like the last Liberal government did with the New Democratic Party, then so be it. I think that's the best part of a parliamentary democracy.
But I suppose in our parliamentary democracy, if you have a majority of any kind, whether it's a coalition or whether you are the single party having enough seats to form a majority, then your opposition parties don't really have that much power.
Yeah, no, your point's well taken. I want to jump in because I think from that perspective, here's another good check and balance. The Senate of Canada, which is another a place in this country that is not utilized appropriately. And again, both John Turner and I have not only lectured about this, we've been staunch opponents to any kind of stasis as it relates to the Senate. The Senate needs to be a more effective place, and it really isn't right now. So that you're seeing right now good appointments to the Senate, people who understand what they call how to make sausages. And I think that's what we need from our senators, instead of a rubber stamp for the government, because they can ask questions, they can be probative. All of those kinds of things could happen after something has happened at that other place and goes to the Senate. So that's a good way to do it. We have a judiciary in this country too that is very, very. It's not political, much like what we see south of the border. So there's they know that they can intervene through the rule of law, and I think that makes it very difficult in a lot of ways for governments to act with impunity. So I think we're okay, but where it's missing really, because the media are probative, you guys do good things, you don't let people off the hook, but I really think where we're not getting the best, and I know this might make a lot of your viewers angry, is we don't talk about politics in schools. It's just not something that, and you want to get kids at a young age sensitized to what is it that makes your country hum? What is it that makes things happen?
Well, I would say that I would reform that in saying we don't. It's not that we don't talk about politics enough in schools. We don't talk about the system of government enough in schools because I think you can leave the politics out while educating kids how the government actually works, because then and you can talk about what the official opposition does, you can talk about what the government does, and I think that's probably most important, and that way you don't allow any agenda, left wing or right wing, to then start influencing the kids in the schools. That's one of the major criticisms of our school systems now.
So you're right, and I think that's true. Government is one thing, but the essence of government is people, right? The essence of that, and so people govern people. So that's been my mantra forever. And I think if people govern people, we got to know about what makes people like they are. And oftentimes it's the essence of politics, because so people are gonna be attuned to that ideology or that ideology based on either their familial experience or being involved in an organization, whatever it is. But that sort of motivates somebody to get involved in a certain political ideology. So I think we have an obligation, I think, from our school systems, from society, to make sure that people are really turned on to those levers that get people to do what you said at the outset of the show, to walk into a voting booth and put your X on a ballot. I want people, when they go into during an election, I want them to think about it. Even if it's that the moment that they get that and they walk over to where the screen is, that now all of a sudden it becomes really, really heady. And that's the important stuff, because as soon as you put your name on or your X on that, boy, oh boy, you know that you're doing something that is going to make an impact. It's very, very important. And I don't think people see that now.
Well, and maybe I'll kind of add to what I said before, is I think it's good to educate kids on what the political spectrum is. And maybe that's what you're talking about, in terms of what does it mean? Like, what is the left in general? What do they focus on in terms of, policies? Like they're more interested in social programs and things like that, versus on the right, they're generally more conservative and less government. And that's where you see cuts and all of this. And that's where that proverbial tug of war happens between the left and the right. But where it used to be in Canada, and I think the U.S. has unfortunately really started to influence our political allegiances up here, which is tragic. But where we used to be in Canada is you didn't get angry at your neighbor because of their political affiliation. It didn't really happen. At least I don't remember that. And it was beneficial to the country to have a bunch of people on the left and a bunch of people on the right, and the government changing sides, now and then, because it kind of kept us balanced.
Yeah.
Yes.
And although the liberals would love to be in power all the time, and the conservatives would love to be in the power all the time, it's good for the country to have that change now and then, and that reset. And if they want it back, to your point, they have to be an effective opposition to hold the other side to account. And that's what we've said to everybody, is that although some people would jump with joy if back in January, if the Liberal Party lost party status, our message was that would actually be a very
bad
problematic
thing for Canada, because you need that opposition that you were talking about. You need a strong opposition.
Because any party, no matter what side of the political spectrum they're on, it's not good to have them too big, and to have too much impunity to execute an agenda. They have to be held to account. Otherwise, you can go down that slippery slope really quick.
Well, and look, why has the Liberal Party been the most prevalent governing party in this country? Why? Because they're the most centrist party. So you could imagine, if you're saying, okay, I'm right over here on the right, you saw that back in the 1800s. People thought that this one way about Johnny MacDonald, and then Laurier comes and he was a little more, you could hear the tinkling of piano keys. So you could see that, I don't want that right. And then all of a sudden you see in the mid-1960s, the Tommy Douglases of the world who said, I think we need to do this. And he had a major impact on things like social reform and healthcare in Canada. God bless the NDP for that. So that's all that social credit thing that came into being. So I think that the Liberal Party right now, the Conservative Party right now, the New Democratic Party right now are brands. They no longer are adherent to a philosophy and only stick to that philosophy. Because if, to your point, if we followed through on the analogy that, say, every single seat in Canada was a Conservative, they'd still have to put in social programs. They'd still have to be sort of left of center on social reform. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't be we're going to cut. We're just going to give tax credit or tax breaks. Blah blah blah. You can't do that. So they have to change the way they operate when they get into government. But to your point, you're talking about here we are. You need to have an effective. Sort of differing voices, because Canada is a diverse country anyway. So you're going to see that diversity in your House of Commons with different ideologies and different people. So I think that we're well served right now.
So in terms of what has happened over the last 2 months, you've seen Trump come into power.
Yes.
He has completely upended geopolitics in the world. He has upended the political environment in Canada. And I'll say no, it wasn't his intention, because he doesn't care what happens in Canada. He cares what happens in the United States.
I'll start it this way. We knew back in October, November of 2024 that Donald Trump was going to win the presidency of the United States. Anybody who said it differently were probably smoking cannabis. But my point is, we knew that this guy was going to win. We also should have known, and we didn't, and I've been very critical of this, that we should have known that when he came to power when he was sworn in January, he was going to do thus and such. He talked about tariffs. He talked about what we'll call decision making during unsettled times. So all of those kinds of issues, I think we got an advanced warning about. At the same time that was happening, we had a prime minister who was at the lowest ebb of his popularity, and for a whole bunch of reasons. And, even my own party was starting to say, you gotta go. You can't read the room. You can't understand that people just don't want you. But he didn't do that. He took the Christmas break and came back and decided himself he was going to do this. And the only way that he could rationally get a new leader elected was to pull a lever that he knew he had, and that was the prorogation of Parliament. So people could say, "Oh no, this is terribly anti-democratic," but no, that's a rule that we've got in a parliamentary democracy, and he took advantage of it because he needed to get the time in place so that a new leader could be put in place. Okay. So people are saying to me, and I hear this oftentimes, they say, well, only 157,000 people voted for the prime minister, for Mark Carney. No, wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. So please don't throw that fact on the table and expect me to bite. Because here's what was going on. The Liberal Party of Canada was saying, we want to elect a new leader. So that's what if you're recognized as a fee-paying member of that party, which I am, you get a vote, and you gotta make sure that you do everything in the party apparatus to get yourself eligible to vote. But
to the point where Canadians are saying only 150,000 people voted for the prime minister. I understand what you're saying when you're saying, well, they didn't do that. They voted for the leader of the Liberal Party.
Yes.
But I would also push back and say, but in the current situation, they were in fact voting for who would be the next Prime Minister of Canada. So that's where Canadians, I think, are upset with that. Now, to take your point, and this is where my stance is, you can't necessarily be upset with the Liberal Party for that. You need to be upset with our system. And if you want that system changed, that's when you need to have a conversation with your member of parliament. My opinion is, if you have a sitting government and if you have a prime minister that has had to be forced out, then I think there should be a general election call, because when Canadians go to an election, they're evaluating both the candidate that is running in their local riding, but also the leader of that party is the potential prime minister. And that's where they decide their vote ultimately. But if you have a situation where any party, and I would take the same position if the Conservatives were in, if Stephen Harper resigned in the middle of his mandate, they should have had to call a general election, because that allows the country to then collectively select their new leader.
Well, I got to push back on that too, because you're talking about a party versus a government.
Right.
But
my point is
he's the leader of a party. So he resigned as the leader of the party. He didn't resign as prime minister. He said, I'm resigning as leader of this party.
But
so I got to protest.
That's both.
Well, but he just happened to be prime minister. But he said, I'm giving up my job as prime minister when the new leader is in place. That's what he said. It was very clear. So that's the process. So people need to understand, he's saying, I don't want to be leader of this party, but I'm still prime minister until I give it up to the new leader.
But you have to be leader of the party in order to be prime minister.
Right.
But this is I think we're into semantics on this, because at the end of the day, he was prime minister until he was no longer prime minister, and he was no longer prime minister until a new leader was elected.
But he still has a seat.
By his party. He still has a seat.
You're right. He's still an MP.
Yes. So what he should have done, maybe, people are asking, what should he have done? He should have said, I'm going to resign my seat today. I'm going to resign my role as the leader of the party. That's fine. There's still a process. The process is he as the government, he's got to go to his government and say, do we want to call an election? Well, and I think the party said, no, let's get a new leader in place. That's the process. Well, I guess people don't like that, because they wanted an election, because they probably thought, well, if we had an election in January, our boy Pierre Poilievre could have won. And who knows?
Who knows? But I guess my point is this, is that why should government and the legislative body, because I think a lot of Canadians assume that all the agencies shut down during prorogation as well, which, as we all know, they do not. They continue on. They continue on, and they keep the lights on. They continue doing what they're doing. But, for example, when the PPC, they're holding their leadership election, nobody cares, because it's happening whether the government's in or not. They're their own organization, and nothing is interrupted. But in this case, you had the Liberal Party saying, okay, well, we're going to completely pause government so we can get our own affairs in order, which is impacting the government. And that's, I think, the issue that I have.
Yeah,
it's not impacting the government. I mean, you still have people. Well, they're not sitting, so they're not. You don't have the opportunity to. Yes, and some people have said that you're non-compliant. But still, sitting in the House of Commons doesn't necessitate that you that's only where you do your work as a member of.
Right, and we've let our audience know that just because your MP is not in the House of Commons legislating right now, it does not mean that they're not working.
Correct.
They're still working. They're still getting a paycheck. If you want to speak to your MP now, is actually a really good time.
Good time. But more at home. They're more at home.
Right. But I think the question is it fair to Canadians who expect our elected members to be legislating right now that they're not legislating?
Well, but we didn't know at the time, and I think it's a really important distinction to make. In January the 6th, did we know that Donald Trump was going to do what he was going to do at the end of January? No. So I think we have to be very clear about the time. And at the same time, and I take exception when people say this, well, he should have called an election right away. So the opposition leader gets to stay in place. The NDP leader gets to stay in place. The leader of the Bloc Québécois gets to stay, but the Liberal Party, who are the government, can't have a leader in position because their leader has just resigned, but we're asking the government to have an election. So we can't as a party have a leader because we're deciding that our leader wants to resign. If you follow that logic, it doesn't make any sense at all. So my point is, let's have a pause. The party wants to do, they want to have a leadership. Let them have that. At the same time, I get to pull a lever, and the lever is on prorogation. And actually prorogation is a good thing because now when we come back, we can start all over again. And I think that this is it's a great time right now. I believe that, we're going to be into an election in days.
Is that what you're hearing as well? Like from your side, you're hearing it too? Okay.
It would be lunacy. And if Mark Carney had asked me, should I call an election? Yes. Should I sit or should I have recall the House? No, that would be the dumbest thing you could do. But it makes no sense even for him as the Prime Minister of this country without a seat to call back the House of Commons. Dumb move. So, and he knows that. And people who are
advising him.
They're totally advising him. So I believe Sunday or Monday of the 23rd or the 24th of March, he's going to go to the Governor General and say, I'm going to ask for a writ. Well,
Mark, it's been a ride, and although our viewers aren't going to agree with everything you said, I hope they've stayed to the end to listen to everything you said, because that's the important part of these discussions. And discussions are boring when you agree on every single thing.
Correct.
So, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. We hope to have you back.
Well, I'd be happy to come back. And we're at a stage right now where it's probably not a bad idea to sort of see how each of the parties are doing during this campaign, because you're right, Ryan. This is going to be probably the most important election I think I'd have seen in my lifetime.